Hello again. In this video, we're going to be thinking about the Greek chorus, but this time the Greek chorus in its historical and cultural context. Now, the chorus was everywhere in ancient Athenian society. Chorus existed long before tragedy did. It was a feature of education. It was a feature of religious worship. It was part of physical training. It was there in civic festivals. Even Plato, who really didn't like theatre, he really thought it was bad for people, asserted that no one could call himself educated who hadn't taken part in singing and dancing in a chorus. So chorus was really important. But looking at chorus in its context also means that we need to look at the political situation in Athens at the period when tragedy was really emerging and flourishing. Because in the 5th century BCE, Athens was in the grip of a really radical experiment in how you governed a city-state. Athens was in the process of inventing democracy. And this was a really groundbreaking idea, the idea that every free citizen male, and notice there are some important exclusions there, not women, not people who had been made slaves, and not foreigners living in the city, but free citizen males had the right and the responsibility to play an active role in deciding how the city was governed. So this was something that simply hadn't been attempted on anything like this scale ever before. And the fact that democracy was emerging at the same time that tragedy was really starting to come into its own as a cultural form means that there are all sorts of interesting relationships between the two. And Edith Hall, in her article, Democracy and Ancient Greek Theatre, says, we have to imagine a democratic citizen audience. So the people who were going to the theatre, the men who were gathering in the theatre of Dionysus to watch tragedy being performed, were the very same men who on different days would be gathering up on the hilltops to speak in the assembly, to vote in the assembly, and to make absolutely life and death decisions about the organisation and the running of Athens. Again, as Edith Hall says, the collective identity of theatre audiences was already determined as fellow citizens. They weren't just a random group of people. The men who gathered in the theatre of Dionysus were also the men who gathered to make key decisions about how the city should run. And in this view, we can start to think of theatre audiences not just as a gang of people out for a good time, enjoying the festival, but maybe we can think of them as a body of citizens, a body of democrats in process, a group of people learning how to do democracy. And the content of the plays kind of supports this view, because tragedy asks some of the most difficult questions about democratic governance. How do we justify going to war? How do we survive the rage and the revenges of the people who are harmed by our wars? Do we have a duty to help refugees? Does our duty to help refugees outweigh the fact that welcoming them into a city might ultimately do harm to the people who were already there? Does the incorporation of strangers pose a mortal threat to a community's integrity and security? So all the big questions that a play's audience might have to grapple with as participants in democratic governance were also being played out on the stage. And the chorus are a huge part of that. I always think it's really interesting that when we talk about the chorus dancing, we talk about them turning and turning again. We talk about them moving in one direction and then retracing their steps, going back in the other. To me, that feels like a response to democratic decision making, that an argument this way, an argument that way, this tension between two opposed points of view and this group in the middle trying to find their equilibrium between the two. And sometimes the choruses of Greek tragedy find a satisfactory solution to their problems, but a lot of the time they don't. As we saw when we were thinking about the play Agamemnon, sometimes the chorus really don't manage to find a solution to these tough questions. Sometimes struggling for an answer, they fracture and fall apart. But again and again, what we see in tragedy are the chorus as an embattled political community. Ordinary people up against the hardest problems they can imagine, thinking together in public, trying to work out how everyone can survive. So for me, I suppose Greek choruses aren't ideal. They don't have access to any special wisdom. That's not why they're interesting. To me, the choruses of Greek tragedy are interesting because of how often they get it wrong, because of how often they misunderstand or make the wrong call or get confused or get scared or lie or cheat. I think they are a really important way of allowing us to understand some of the real difficulties that faced the city in the 5th century BCE, some of the real challenges associated with becoming democrats, with ordinary people having to face up to really big decisions, and really big decisions where sometimes there is no right answer. The chorus, like the male free citizens of Athens, have to weigh up different rights and responsibilities, competing claims, different ideas about what might be the right action to take. They try to deal justly without knowing how things are going to turn out. Again and again, they have to make hard choices. And this, for me, is one of the things that makes tragedy continually compelling and continuingly important, actually. The choruses of Greek tragedy are just ordinary people trying to do the right thing in an imperfect and unpredictable world. And maybe for me, that's the thing that makes tragedy feel most resonant and most relevant right now. So have I given you all the answers? No. But I hope I have given you a few new questions to carry with you as you undertake your own exploration of Greek tragedy, as you read and as you watch, and once theatres are open again, as you become a spectator of tragedy. It's always important to keep asking the question, why do we keep returning to these ancient plays, and what can they teach us about the choices we make now? They don't always straightforwardly show us the right answer. They do show us that from its very earliest times, doing democracy has always been about that uncertain struggle between difficult choices and unpredictable outcomes. I hope you enjoy your exploration.